Origins was originally intended to only be a 3-part series, but we have decided to extend the show as new information on the origins of SARS-CoV-2 has come to light. If you are one of the thousands of people who have enjoyed this series, please consider giving us a small monetary donation to support our work. We have a Patreon account at patreon.com/media, as well as a Cash App account at DA Media 2021. That's $, capital D, capital A, Media 2021. Also, please rate and review this show on Apple Podcasts and share and suggest it to friends who you think would find it interesting. Thank you for listening.
Dr. Fauci, as you are aware, it is a crime to lie to Congress. On your last trip to our committee on May 11th, you stated that the NIH has not ever and does not now fund gain-of-function research in the Wuhan Institute of Virology. And yet, Dr. Shi credits the NIH and lists the actual number of the grant that she was given by the NIH. She took 2 bat coronavirus genes and combined them with a SARS-related backbone to create new viruses that are not found in nature. These experiments combine genetic information from different coronaviruses that infect animals but not humans to create novel artificial viruses able to infect human cells. This research fits the definition of the research that the NIH said was subject to the pause in 2014 to 2017, a pause in funding on gain of function. Dr. Richard E. Bright, a molecular biologist from Rutgers, described this research in Wuhan as, "This is high-risk research that creates new potential pandemic pathogens that exist only in the lab, not in nature. This research matches," these are Dr. E. Bright's words, "this research matches, indeed epitomizes, the definition of gain-of-function research, done entirely in Wuhan, for which there was supposed to be a federal pause." Dr. Fauci, knowing that it is a crime to lie to Congress, do you wish to retract your statement of May 11th where you claimed that the NIH never funded gain-of-function research in Wuhan?
Senator Paul, I have never lied before the Congress, and I do not retract that statement. This paper that you are referring to was judged by qualified staff up and down the chain as not being gain of function.
So
let me finish.
You take an animal virus and you increase its transmissibility to humans.
Right.
You're saying that's not gain of function?
Yeah, that is correct. And Senator Paul, you do not know what you are talking about, quite frankly. And I want to say that officially. You do not know what you are talking about.
In China, the city of Wuhan is still on lockdown, with Americans trapped inside as the number of worldwide cases
in Italy has surged by 919 in a single day. That is more than
Top scientist Tulio de Oliveira discovered the new variant after observing a dramatic
is acting as an accelerant to conspiracy theories. The digital era we live in
came as the United States recorded more than 2,400 deaths
that has been reported from Brazil. And the third has come as the more contagious variant of COVID-19
the number of deaths recorded from COVID in the UK has passed 100,000.
Wuhan, China, show it likely played a role in the development of
China's study into the origins of COVID-19. They've concluded that it's unlikely it came from a Wuhan lab.
I'm John Duffy, and this is Origins, Birth of a Pandemic, Part 6. On July 20th, 2021, Dr. Anthony Fauci again denied that the NIH funded gain-of-function research at the Wuhan Institute of Virology while testifying before the Senate. The video of this testimony went viral, with a host of news outlets effectively proclaiming that Dr. Fauci owned or blasted Senator Rand Paul. Then, in early September of 2021, documents describing an NIH grant to the EcoHealth Alliance were made public by The Intercept that explained how grant money was sent to the Wuhan Institute of Virology, who then used it to do experiments on humanized mice with coronaviruses that were made in the lab by combining various parts of wild coronaviruses, and that these viruses made the mice more ill than non-chimeric coronaviruses.
I ran congressional investigations, okay? I have had to warn people verbally and in writing, attorneys, about what the legal implications are of lying and misleading Congress. I've had to send those letters. It's not some theoretical idea I have, like the writers at the Intercept. Anthony Fauci lied before Congress. He should be prosecuted for getting in front of Congress and doing this weaselly word about what I think gain of function is and calling a senator a liar. It's ridiculous. I've never seen that before in my life. I mean, it's unprecedented.
This is Paul Thacker again, the journalist and former Senate investigator who we heard from in part 4 of this series.
Just this last month, because of 2 documents, what do we know now? We finally got a release of Peter Daszak's bat research NIH grant, right? And we also have a proposal he submitted to DARPA, which is a U.S. military research program.
DARPA is the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency, which is an agency under the U.S. Department of Defense responsible for research and development of emerging technologies for use by the military. The grant proposal Paul is referring to was a proposal that was drafted by the EcoHealth Alliance in March of 2018 that was made public in September of 2021 by Drastic after relevant documents were given to them by a whistleblower. This grant proposal was to work with the Wuhan Institute of Virology, amongst others, including Ralph Barrick's lab at the University of North Carolina, to create a project called DEFUSE. The stated aim of the project was, quote, diffusing the threat of bat-borne coronaviruses. To accomplish this, the EcoHealth Alliance was seeking a total of $14.2 million. According to the grant proposal submitted to DARPA by Peter Daszak and the EcoHealth Alliance, they wanted to inject deadly chimeric bat coronaviruses collected by the Wuhan Institute of Virology into both humanized mice as well as, quote, batified mice. Further, they wanted to, quote, inoculate bats with immune modulators, as well as with novel chimeric polyvalent recombinant spike proteins. They would do this by, quote, developing effective molecular delivery via automated aerosolization onto bats at roost entrance at our 3 test cave sites in a cave complex in Yunnan, China, where SARS-CoVs have infected people. The phrase, our 3 test cave sites in Yunnan where SARS-CoVs have infected people, is probably a reference to the Mojang mine. And the fact that the proposal calls them our caves indicates again the focus that Daszak and Dr. Shizheng Li of the Wuhan Institute of Virology had placed on this mine as a collection site for viral samples. In fact, 1 year before submitting this grant proposal to DARPA, Peter Daszak was a speaker at the Consortium of Universities for Global Health Conference, where he said this.
And we've now found a very large diversity of SARS-like coronaviruses. Some are almost identical to SARS. In fact, there's one cave in Yunnan province that has every genetic element of the SARS coronavirus circulating in bats.
Reading further into the DARPA documents, we find what many people have pointed to as its most crucial detail, which is the fact that the drafters of the proposal stated their intentions to insert a furin cleavage site into SARS-like viruses. The proposal states, quote, we will analyze all SARS-CoV-2 gene sequences for the presence of potential furin cleavage sites. And then, quote, where clear mismatches occur, we will insert appropriate human-specific cleavage sites and evaluate growth potential in varocells and HAE cultures. Now, many defenders have pointed out that this DARPA proposal was declined. However, that does not mean this work was not being done.
In that grant proposal being submitted to DARPA, he talks about doing these chimeric viruses. He says in there how it's not gain of function, it's not dual use. Well, DARPA, after they reject it, they say, well, if he does resubmit this, we need to have a risk mitigation plan because this looks like gain of function dual use research. Well, then you go and look and see that research he describes in the DARPA grant, he was already doing it through an NIH grant, which had not had any risk mitigation for gain of function.
On September 30th, 2021, John Cohen of Science magazine hosted a panel on the origins of SARS-CoV-2. When that panel happened, Drastic had just released the DARPA proposal to the world, and the members of the panel touched on its implications.
And a lot of the theories about and hypotheses about bioengineering say, how did this virus get a furin cleavage site? Because this SARS-related family of viruses, they don't have furin cleavage sites. Now, other bat coronaviruses in a more ancestral or broader family do have it, and so that's one argument against it, but it speaks to the question of bioengineering. But the DARPA proposal that's received intense attention over the past few weeks has received intense attention because of a paragraph that describes an experiment where you put furin cleavage sites or other proteolytic cleavage sites into the viruses. So here's my question. Do you think that the virus could have been bioengineered? And Linfa, I'm going to assume that you don't think it was bioengineered, right?
One of the members of the panel, Dr. Linfa Wang of Duke Medical School in Singapore, who is also a longtime collaborator of Dr. Shi-Zhang Li's, also happened to be one of the virologists slated by the DARPA proposal itself to take on a portion of the proposed research.
Obviously, I'm the one that, because I'm a co-PI on the grant, but I think I'm the one have least knowledge than you guys on the panel when you have a grant which was not funded, and especially from DARPA. What's the kind of process of make this public, right? So that's kind of not my area. I'm not sort of against the idea of you can artificially insert a furin cleavage site in a coronavirus. Of course you can, right? But what I'm trying to argue is that the nature always wins, can do much better than us.
This statement by Dr. Wang, that it just wasn't his area to be talking about the contents of a failed grant proposal, seemed like a massive dodge of responsibility. Fortunately, the issue wasn't immediately dropped by the panel.
Because of your connection to the grant, because of your connection to the Wuhan Institute of Virology, do you have problems with the transparency here?
Well, I'm not, because I don't understand the rules of you failed a military DARPA grant. What's the proper procedure of release that information? Because do we always release failed grants?
Right, but did you know about that paragraph in the proposal? Did you know that that was part of it?
Of course I know.
So why didn't you publicly say, yes, there was a proposal to do this experiment, it didn't happen?
But it's not to me, right? I'm not that part, So what I have been saying is that from day one, I said to engineer the coronavirus, right, in a lab, technically that's possible. But to engineer a SARS-CoV-2 from existing knowledge, that's not possible.
After being pressed by Cohen, Linfa merely repeated that he was unaware of the protocol regarding talking about failed grants. Dr. Jesse Bloom, who we heard a clip of in part 5 of this series, while still remaining deferential, challenged Dr. Wang's excuse for his silence.
And going to this DARPA proposal, I'm just going to put it out there and say that, this furin cleavage site has been extensively discussed, in the debate on this for over a year and a half. Lots of people have criticized the idea as a conspiracy theory. For quite a while, I agreed with this. And I was really sort of stunned when a week ago, this DARPA proposal, which Peter Daszak, Ralph Barrick, Linfa, Zhang Li are on, came out. And in that, they are specifically proposing to engineer protease, including furin cleavage sites in SARS-related coronaviruses. So as you said, the proposal wasn't funded, and that specific work, at least in that proposal, from 3 years ago, was going to be done at UNC rather than Wuhan Institute of Virology. But I think it clearly shows that the idea that someone might put a furin cleavage site it's not fair to call that a conspiracy theory if in fact the researchers involved were proposing it. And I mean, this is really a question I almost have for you, Linfa. I just think in the interest of what we're talking about, needing to be transparent and putting the information out there, if this discussion was going on for the last year and a half and people knew that there was a proposal by some of the researchers involved, even if it wasn't funded, that suggested that, why did no one come forward and just put this information out there? I mean, if this had been described at the beginning in a transparent way, I would say, okay, but the fact that it kind of came to light under a leak after all of this discussion, we should mention it. I mean, to me, that's just not transparent and honest.
Dr. Alina Chan also condemned the lack of transparency by the Wuhan Institute of Virology and the drafters of the DEFUSE proposal to DARPA. But beyond that, she tried to dig into the details of specifically who proposed this furin cleavage site insertion.
It's not a conspiracy for scientists to not disclose their data. It's very normal. In fact, we have no insight to all the viruses collected at the WIV after 2016. If you read the literature, all those viruses have been collected before 2016. So we have no idea what they found. And if you read the DARPA proposal, they said precisely they were copying parts from nature. They were looking at natural furin cleavage sites and putting these into SARS viruses in the lab with slight tweaks. So what we're seeing is completely consistent with a lab escape of a virus that had a furin cleavage site from nature put into it. So my question for Linfa is, who proposed this furin cleavage site insertion in the paper? Was it Shi Chunli? Did she propose to put the furin cleavage site? So was it Ralph?
I mean, that's not, I don't know who proposed. That's not, the part, we each have a part, right? The Wuhan Institute was the field research, the immunology, and UNC is doing the virology, so that it's pretty obvious, right? Yeah.
From his comments, it seems that Dr. Wang is suggesting that Ralph Barrick at the University of North Carolina would have been the person doing the work of inserting the furin cleavage site into the SARS-like viruses. But that didn't satisfy Dr. Chan, so she continued to press Dr. Wang on the issue, only to, unfortunately, have the panel moderator, John Cohen, move the conversation along to less dangerous territory.
Who proposed the idea? Because the idea says that we are reviewing our deep sequencing data. We've seen these cleavage sites, and we're going to put them into SARS viruses in the lab. So the question is, who had the idea and access to this data and could do it in the lab in a seamless way?
UNC, right? It's a UNC lab. The grant is very clear.
It's University of North Carolina. In case
yeah.
But I want to jump to a question from Emily Copper, reporter at CQ Roll.
John will do this panel and host like a debate. But why did he not immediately, when this DARPA proposal comes out, call up Drastic and say, whoa, wait a second here. Hold on a second here. You've denied that you were doing furin cleavages. It couldn't possibly happen. Christian Anderson said this, this, and this. You could do a whole story about furin cleavages and who had said what about what. So there's a whole lot of games going on here.
I asked Paul what he thought of the fact that it was Drastic that was able to bring the DEFUSE proposal to light.
These documents from DARPA were leaked to Drastic, which is an online investigative group that has been pilloried and called all sorts of names by mainstream media. And yet the documents were given to Drastic, which, you know what that tells you? As a person who's worked with whistleblowers and leakers, that tells you that whoever leaked those documents trusts Drastic more than is trusted the New York Times, Nature, Science, and Scientific American, these other publications. They are not to be trusted. That's what that tells you when you see that, who it's leaked to. And what the documents show us is a very somewhat sophisticated program that was proposed by EcoHealth Alliance to try and investigate viruses that are found in bats and figure out a way to try to keep them from infecting humans. Now, the problem is that what they disclosed also in that program is, number one, we now know that Peter Daszak has been caught in another lie. He had tweeted out that Shi Zhengli at the Wuhan Institute of Virology was not doing research with bats. He said specifically in the grant that 20 bats would be housed at the Wuhan Institute of Virology, that there would be research done with bats at the Wuhan Institute of Virology. He proposed this. This was in 2018. So then for years after he promised the military that Shi Zhengli would do research with bats in the lab at Wuhan, he then went and told everyone that anyone who said that she did research on bats at Wuhan was a liar, was a conspiracy theorist. The other lie that we know now is that, in that research, he proposed to create these chimeric viruses, which DARPA said in the rejection that if they did happen to fund that type of research, it would need to have a risk mitigation plan under gain-of-function research. What DARPA did not know when he submitted that grant to DARPA is that he was already doing that type of gain-of-function research, those exact same studies through an NIH grant. An NIH grant that we were told was not gain-of-function. So think about that. That's what we know when you compare the documents.
I asked Paul what he thought about the many scientists and researchers who are connected to the various institutions, especially the EcoHealth Alliance, who have not come forward over the course of the pandemic to at least stand against the claims that those who take the lab leak hypothesis seriously are conspiracy theorists.
Any of these scientists right now who are affiliated with EcoHealth Alliance, like Linfa Wang, what we know is that they were on proposals. They've been a part of research done by EcoHealth Alliance, and they have been silent while Peter Daszak has lied about multiple aspects of the research that he was doing, and they said nothing. The people who have made the argument that it could have been a lab leak do not have a history of how they've been caught in lies. The people who have made the argument that this may have happened through natural spillover now have a history of being caught in multiple lies. When you keep catching someone lying, at what point do you just say they don't have any more credibility? Shi Zhengli has been lying multiple times, yet people still go to her for questions. She's still publishing in major scientific journals. In February of 2020, Daszak is on a Lancet statement with multiple members of the EcoHealth Alliance that calls it a conspiracy to say it came from a lab. In April of 2020, Peter Daszak tells Josh Rogan, "I have no conflicts of interest." We then find out he orchestrated that statement in the Lancet without disclosing any conflicts of interest. What is a conflict of interest? He was directly funding the lab that he said it was a conspiracy theory if you said it came from that lab. Then you find out in June of this year, his conflict of interest statement expands dramatically at the Lancet. Peter Daszak's conflict of interest statement at the Lancet is now at over 400 words. I have never in my life seen a conflict of interest statement so long by one person ever published in a medical journal. He then resigns from the COVID Origins Commission, and then Jeffrey Sachs just shut it down because of ties to EcoHealth Alliance. At this point in time, if you look at the series of lies of hidden conflicts of interest that are associated with EcoHealth Alliance or people who work with or are funded with EcoHealth Alliance, and you can't conclude that this is a toxic organization, then you have not been following the story.
If SARS-CoV-2 never made its way into the human population, most of us would still be unaware of the existence of the EcoHealth Alliance. With the publication of the EcoHealth Alliance's DARPA proposal, I could only wonder what other proposals they had, both successful and not, as well as what other type of work they might be engaged in that almost no one in the public is aware of. Paul, at least, thought there was potential corruption to be discovered within their inner workings.
Peter Daszak runs a pretty interesting organization. It's very unique. It's been somewhat kept in the background. It's been kind of maybe a bit of a useful idiot for a lot of agencies. Like, how do we get money to where we wanted to go? Well, we can go through this guy. If you look historically, he was not always doing this. Back in the old days, they were doing wildlife conservation. And he was making $80,000 a year when he first joined. He's now making, almost $500,000, and their budget has ballooned. They went from, I can't remember where they were, Pennsylvania or whatever, and now they're like in Manhattan. So he's totally changed the type of research they do into doing this biomedical research because there's just more funding there. On the Hill right now, there are some people on committees that have looked at the fact that they have a DARPA proposal that asks for this, a USAID proposal that says this, an NIH grant that says this. And, some people are asking, like, is some of this research overlapping? Or have they double billed, in some of these grants? It would not be, it would not be an odd story to find out that there's grant fraud going on, because grant fraud is going on all the time.
On October 5th, 2021, the Japan Times wrote in a story titled, "Biden Shifts to a More Conciliatory Approach Toward China," that President Joe Biden, quote, appeared to bow to another Chinese demand that the U.S. stop tracing the origins of the COVID-19 virus, even though the world has a right to know if China caused the worst disaster of our time that killed more than 4.5 million people worldwide. Biden announced on August 27th that the intelligence inquiry he initiated has ended, despite the fact that it failed to uncover the genesis of the pandemic. With the US president seemingly disinterested in or afraid to pursue an investigation into the origins of SARS-CoV-2, those around the world who care about what caused the COVID-19 pandemic are left looking to groups like Drastic and other independent researchers like Drs. Latham and Wilson at the Bioscience Resource Institute. They are left with dedicated journalists like Paul Thacker and Josh Rogan, and even the few standout academic scientists like Dr. Alina Chan, who just won't let the issue drop. But is that enough?
We need to have some sort of legal entity set up. I don't know if it's going to be an attorney general for one of the states. It's not going to be anyone out of the Justice Department because we have a Democratic president and presidencies don't tend to investigate themselves. Like that's just not how government functions. And so what we need is someone with legal authority to compel document production. No more debates. I don't want to see any more debates at Science Magazine or Nature, or I don't care if the New Yorker has like, let's discuss science and how this started. No, we don't need that. We need legal proceedings to happen, and that needs to be an investigation. Right now, we're in a situation in which a bunch of attorneys general are suing ExxonMobil over climate change because we know of the damages that are happening right now with climate change. Every state in America has had thousands of people die. And so hopefully what can happen is some attorney general will see this as a reason to begin investigating and subpoena documents from the NIH, subpoena documents from Peter Daszak. No more debates, produce documents. This scandal is not a science scandal. It is not a scandal that would be figured out by scientists. This is an investigation about corruption. Scientists don't investigate corruption.
So much potential evidence as to where SARS-CoV-2 came from could be under lock and key in China. So I asked Paul about what he thought could be found if someone with subpoena power were to take a look at what was available here in the US.
In the proposal to DARPA, Eco Health Alliance discloses that they have thousands of viruses. They themselves, they say this. Now, whether those are housed at the Wuhan Institute of Virology or some other place, they say that they have these viruses and that they have other samples. They planned on creating a couple of different chimeric viruses every year. So they claim in a proposal to the United States federal government that they are in possession of viruses. So it is a possibility to ask, like, what are those sequences? Because the Eco Health Alliance does not have a database, it's public. So what are those sequences? Like, what do they have? We don't know. We just know that they tell the federal government that they have them.
When I last spoke with Dr. Latham, he suggested something similar.
If you read David Quammen's Spillover book, it's an interesting book because he interviews Alexei Chimura, who is now the chief of staff of the Eco Health Alliance, and then was a graduate student working in Wuhan. Chimura tells Quammen that For every sample that's collected by the project in China, it's split in two, basically, and one half goes to Wuhan, and the other half gets flown back to New York City. Is it stored in a freezer in New York City? I think that's unlikely. What would they do with those samples?
No matter where the EcoHealth Alliance stores its viral samples, it must be cataloging them in a database. The records they have of viral samples and sequences, as well as logs of work done with these samples and sequences, can be subpoenaed and examined by federal or even state investigators. The question is, will anyone with the power to look into the EcoHealth Alliance, as well as the National Institutes of Health, actually step up and do so?
Here's the reality. January 6th happened. We had a bunch of yokels attack the Capitol, right? We have had innumerable congressional hearings about this. We have had special commissions put together by the United States Congress over something that was terrible and stupid, but led to only, I think, a handful of deaths, right? And a small amount of damage, property damage. We had almost 700,000 Americans died. The economy was turned upside down, and we haven't had a single goddamn public hearing about this yet. It's fucking embarrassing for Congress to be like this. That's the reality. I mean, think about that. That's ridiculous. There's been like one on the Committee on Science and Health. We haven't had any documents that have been subpoenaed yet from the federal government. It's ridiculous. It's because it's totally political. You have Anthony Fauci at the NIH who's funding this research and has been funding it for years, has testified before Congress and obviously lied about the type of research that was going on at the Wuhan Institute of Virology. He is not responding to congressional requests for documents. Peter Daszak, who is funded by Anthony Fauci, is not responding to congressional requests for documents. Even if you compare what happened under the coronavirus to 9/11, there's around 3,000 people died. And the economic impact to New York State was something like 45 billion or something like that, I believe is what it was. The coronavirus impact to New York State has been 100 billion. That's just the New York State. And I don't even know how many thousands of people have died in New York State. And yet we haven't had a single decent congressional investigation of this where documents have been subpoenaed from the federal government, from Peter Daszak. I mean, think about that. That's crazy when you think about that. The congressional committee that's investigating coronavirus is worried about what Trump did involving the fact that we had no testing for coronavirus in March of last year. They're not interested in like how the thing started so that we prevent the next one. They're not interested in that. They're interested in how do we harm Trump so that we can win in 2024. That's what it's all about now.
As of the writing of this episode, it appears that there is little, if any, interest at the presidential level in conclusively understanding the origins of the COVID-19 pandemic. The Lancet shut down its investigation into the pandemic origins due to bias in links to the EcoHealth Alliance, which our guest Paul Thacker wrote an article about for the British Medical Journal. Dr. Alina Chan co-authored a book with Matt Ridley titled Viral: The Search for the Origin of COVID-19, which should be available in November of 2021. Doctors Jonathan Latham and Allison Wilson of the Bioscience Resource Project and Independent Science News continue to investigate the origins of SARS-CoV-2, and Dr. Latham just gave a presentation to the British Medical Journal about their Mojang minor hypothesis, in which he highlights how the so-called UK variant likely evolved in just one person. For their part, Drastic continues to unearth material that supports the lab leak hypothesis, including a new analysis that group member Billy Bosticson sent to me today, titled October Surprise in Wuhan. This analysis, done by Bosticson, Yvette Ganem, and Gilles Demanouve, and which is available on the Drastic website at drasticresearch.org, lays out a host of circumstantial evidence that points to SARS-CoV-2 or its immediate progenitor spreading amongst the population of Wuhan in October of 2019. Some of this evidence includes multiple international students in Wuhan reporting pneumonia outbreaks starting prior to the official first cases of COVID-19. A large number of participants in the International Military Games that were held in Wuhan in October of 2019 complaining of COVID-19-like infections, with some Spanish participants testing positive for coronavirus antibodies when they returned home. And even that, according to their CTO, a Sacramento, California company called Thermogenesis, quote, knew about the outbreak in November of 2019, and that they had been developing a, quote, rapid antibody test since November, when they first learned of the new coronavirus. How they would have been aware of the new coronavirus at such an early time can only be speculated on. But the Drastic document does detail the company board and their many close links to China. Right as this episode was being completed, in a letter sent by the NIH Deputy Director, Lawrence Tabak, to U.S. Representative James Comer, the NIH admitted that they had funded gain-of-function research at the Wuhan Institute of Virology via the EcoHealth Alliance. Tabak's letter pushes the blame onto the EcoHealth Alliance, stating, quote, EcoHealth is being notified that they have 5 days from today to submit to NIH any and all unpublished data from the experiments conducted under this award. The letter also tried to claim that RATG13 and Banal52 could not have evolved into SARS-CoV-2 because their genomes are as far apart as those between humans and chimpanzees, and that such evolution would take far too long. This is a surprisingly inaccurate comparison to make, as 30,000 nucleotide RNA viruses evolve much more rapidly than 3 billion nucleotide primates. This statement also clearly ignores what we now know from the DARPA proposal, that the EcoHealth Alliance had every intention of combining various genetic components from different coronaviruses. Further, that they had every intention of testing these new chimeric viruses in bats and mice. It is entirely possible that SARS-CoV-2 arose when one of these chimeric viruses was then submitted to serial passaging. Then, on October 21st, The Intercept reported that in an EcoHealth Alliance progress report to the NIH that had finally been turned over to them as part of their FOIA lawsuit, it was revealed that the EcoHealth Alliance had also been making chimeric versions of the MERS coronavirus. MERS is not an animal virus. It is a human virus that has a fatality rate as high as 35%. Currently, SARS-CoV-2's global fatality rate sits at beneath 0.5%. And the EcoHealth Alliance and the Wuhan Institute of Virology had been swapping new receptor binding domains onto the MERS backbone. MERS, it should be noted, was specifically banned from being used in gain-of-function experiments by the NIH's funding moratorium guidelines. For full disclosure, we did reach out to the EcoHealth Alliance for comment and never got a response. We also reached out to Dr. Linfa Wang and to Dr. Ralph Barrick for comment, and neither responded to our requests. In this, what is likely to be the final episode of this series, I will close by echoing Paul Thacker's sentiment that the entire story of the origins of SARS-CoV-2 and the subsequent failure to investigate it properly is a story about corruption. Corruption of politics, corruption of media, and unfortunately, corruption of science. After 9/11, for those who have forgotten, the George W. Bush administration did not want a congressional investigation of the attacks. It was the families of the dead who fought and pushed and who made sure to be very loud and very vocal and exceedingly persistent, who ultimately forced the 9/11 Commission into being. Though the commission ultimately disappointed these family members on many fronts, it did reveal many clues as to how the 9/11 attacks were allowed to unfold. despite the fact that so many of the responsible parties were overseas. The 9/11 Commission, in concert with the Congressional Joint Inquiry Report and the Inspector General's reports from the FBI and CIA, were able to lay out a large map of domestic responsibility for the success of the 9/11 attacks. Similarly, investigations with subpoena power could begin by cracking open the files of the EcoHealth Alliance and the National Institutes of Health, as well as the email accounts of connected individuals. The amount of deception seen from the EcoHealth Alliance and even the National Institutes of Health at this point should make all of us stand up and demand a federal investigation. While such an effort, like the 9/11 Commission, would most likely be hampered by politics, it could still bring new information to light that could tip the scales in one clear direction or the other as to where SARS-CoV-2 came from. The fact that this isn't currently happening should raise our collective suspicions. Thank you for listening to Origins: Birth of a Pandemic. Origins was written, reported, and edited by me, John Duffy. Our producer was Ray Novoselsky. Field audio recording by Kristen Turo. Original score by Zachary Walter. Origins is made without sponsors and is paid for by listeners like you. If you can, please make a donation to our Patreon account at patreon.com/double*media, or simply donate via Cash App at DA Media 2021. Also, please rate and review this show on Apple Podcasts and share and suggest it to friends who you think would find it interesting. Thank you for listening.